Last time we spoke about the new policies of the ailing Qing Dynasty and the rise of the revolutionaries, such as Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Empress Dowager Cixi begrudgingly had to endorse major reforms to try and keep her ailing dynasty alive. It was a step in the right direction, however, it came far too late. The Qing Dynasty was simultaneously trying to please the foreign powers and her populace. Yet her populace were being strangled with taxes. Their faith in their government had never sunk so low, and in general, many simply felt it was time for real change. Once intellectuals who went abroad came back with new ideologies, it was like death coming to the door. Revolutionaries began protests, strikes, assassinations, and uprisings. Dr. Sun Yat-sen became one of the most prolific backers of major uprisings, traveling around the globe to receive funding support from overseas Chinese and other allies. It was only a matter of time. This episode is the Wuchang Uprising. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Craig Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia and so much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that you are still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel over at YouTube. Over there, I've just released a 4-part series on the Japanese invasion of Manchuria. Also, please check out my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel, where you can find more exclusive podcasts. There was a little something I glossed over in the last podcast, and I did so on purpose. I just felt this episode needed to start with this event. 1900 to 1908 saw an incredible amount of change for China. As much as I am foreshadowing the downfall of the Qing Dynasty, it has to be said the efforts to modernize during this time period were colossal. In their own little way, the Chinese had a sort of a Meiji restoration. But while it was going on, at full speed, the year of 1908 would change much. Despite all of the changes, there was a looming and rather glaring problem. The Manchu minority still dominated the Han majority. Cixi resisted tooth and nail to make sure that the inner circle was always Manchu. Even Li Hangzhang, whom held a very special relationship with Cixi, was arguably one of the most important people of the empire, but he was never made a member of the Grand Council. Cixi clung to the notion the Dragon Throne must be occupied by a Manchu, and she would undermine the chance of a parliamentary monarchy for a republic. One of the most fervent advocates of military action to overthrow the Manchu dynasty is the man we have come to talk about in the last podcast, Dr. Sun Yat-sen. He had been attempting an uprising since 1895, and not only would he not give up, he just kept gaining more and more traction. The Empress Dowager did not take the uprisings lightly. In her words, "These flames that could spark off a prairie fire, and a cable after cable urge them to extinguish them, do not let them spread." The Empress Dowager actually had a lot on her plate. The Western powers were ever encroaching. The Boxer Protocol had China paying incredible sums to them. Reforms were likewise very expensive. The populace were being fleeced dry, and certainly not happy about it. Revolutionaries were trying to kill her and overthrew the Manchu-run dynasty. Hell, I have not really gone into it, but Japan was spending an incredible amount of money trying to get as close as possible to any high-ranking official within the dynasty to try and dominate it. The Japanese figured the Empress Dowager was going to die sooner or later, and so they tossed their efforts at trying to make Emperor Guangxu a puppet. But then something happened. In 1908, Emperor Guangxu became gravely ill. Doctors from multiple provinces were summoned to Beijing. Guangxu wrote notes to his doctors complaining about hearing noises and, quote, Sometimes distant wind and rain and human voices and drum beating. Other times, cicadas chirping and silk being torn. There is not a moment of peace. Great pains from the waist down, difficulty in lifting my arms to wash my face, deafness and shivering from the cold, under even 4 quilts. Guangxu berated his doctors for not curing him or making him feel any better. Yet he hung on tenaciously to life. Now, during the summer of 1908, Cixi began to suffer from diarrhea herself. The year was an extremely busy one for her. She was micromanaging countless aspects of reforms and was meeting with the 13th Dalai Lama, a very important issue as the British had recently encroached upon Tibet. After her 73rd birthday on November the 3rd of 1908, she felt death was on its way. She ordered Prince Qing to go to the eastern mausoleums to check out her burial ground, and in the meantime she focused her attention upon keeping the empire's affairs in order. Then there was the issue of Guangxu. He was bedridden, seemingly on the verge of death, but refused to die. In her mind, if he survived her, he might send the empire straight into the hands of the Japanese. Thus, Empress Dowager Cixi ordered her adoptive son to be killed. Some of you older listeners, or those who have heard the history of Cixi, might be gasping a bit. But yes, indeed, since 2008, in a forensic examination of Guangxu's remains, it has been indicated that he had a certain level of arsenic over 2,000 times that of the ordinary person. Guangxu was certainly poisoned with arsenic, but who did it? There are some who believe it could have been Yuan Shikai. Perhaps he poisoned the emperor because he knew he would be executed if Cixi died before him. Now, Cixi had a much easier time poisoning Guangxu, as she simply had better access to him. Regardless, at 6:33 p.m. on November the 14th, Emperor Guangxu was pronounced dead by the royal physicians. The Grand Council gathered at Cixi's bedside while Guangxu lay dying, and then she learnt of his death. Upon hearing this, she arranged his succession. Zaifeng was to be made regent, and his 2-year-old son, Pu Yi, Cixi's great-nephew, was named the new emperor of the Qing Dynasty. Cixi was said to work throughout the night until 11 a.m. in the morning, getting everything settled. 3 hours later, she died. And so went one of the most influential figures in modern Chinese history, lover or hater. No, something else was brewing in the empire. All of the reforms and modernization led China to dramatically expand her railways. In the last years of the Qing Dynasty, the government's railway policy experienced a transition, however. The Qing, prior to 1908, had supported the province's efforts to build railways. Then in 1908, Zhang Zhidong was appointed superintendent of the Guangzhou Hankow Railway, and then in December of that same year, he was made superintendent over the Sichuan Hankow line. Alongside the Minister of Communications, Xing Qihuai, these two men began shifting the Qing policy to nationalize the two mentioned railways and would rely on foreign investments for railway construction. Historian Sun Xujian had this to say about the issue. Preparations were inadequate. The government neither offered extensive persuasion propaganda nor obtained the approval of the National Assembly or provincial assemblies. The court simply nationalized the railways in an autocratic manner. When nationalization met with opposition, instead of diffusing the crisis flexibly, the government persisted in its arbitrary ways. When it found mistakes in the decision-making, the government refused to make any modifications. In the end, the crisis spun out of control. A reasonable policy, properly executed, could have succeeded. According to historian Chen Tingxiang, the Qing government's response to the backlash that would become known as the Railway Protection Movement failed for 3 reasons. Number 1, the announcement and implementation of the railway nationalization was reckless. Number 2, the government was internally divided on the issue. Number 3, the officials' suspicions of each other led to the failure in quelling the unrest. Historian Chen Xiaodong also had 3 points to make about the issue. He stated first, the Qing government did not present the two issues, that of the railway nationalization and foreign loans to the provincial assemblies and National Assembly. Secondly, they violated the new corporation law and attempted to confiscate the shares of the commercial company. And thirdly, the Qing government refused to listen to the pleas of the Sichuan provincial officials, and they were unwilling to compromise, forcing the people into very desperate actions. Now, going back in time to explain some of this, in 1898 and 1900, Sheng Shuhuai negotiated the Guangzhou-Hankow Railway Loan Protocol with the American China Development Company. They received the right to build the line. But the company breached the contract by failing to finish the line on time, and secretly sold 4,000 of the 6,000 shares of the company to Belgium. By 1905, Zhang Zhidong recommended negotiations and recovered the rights to the line. Though the Chinese got back the rights to the line, they still lacked funds to build it. In Zhang Zhidong's words, "At present, the only way to do this great project is to rely on borrowed money." In 1907, to build up the Hubei portion of the line, Zhang Zhidong sought to borrow £2 million from Everard Fraser, the British Consul General in Hankow. The following year, Zhang Zhidong was appointed the supervisor over the Guangzhou-Hankow line and the Hubei portion of the Sichuan line. On June 6 of 1909, Zhang Zhidong drafted a loan agreement with Germany's Deutsche Bank, the British Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, and France's Banque Indosuez. The United States wanted to get in on the action as well, that sweet piece of pie, but during the process on October 4th, Zhang Zhidong died of illness. Because they were literally in the process of negotiations, everything would be shuffled around. On November 5th of 1909, the Hubei Railway Association opposed the loan and abrogated the protocol. On the 14th, a coalition of Hubei gentry, merchants, military officials, and very educated representatives got together and announced they would fund the railway themselves. They asked the Ministry of Communications and the Board of Revenue to cancel the draft agreements with the foreigners. In March of 1910, the coalition was given the right to establish a railway company, but many knew their fundraising could be untrustworthy. This prompted the officials from Britain, France, Germany, and America to angrily demand their rights and interests be met. The Qing Foreign Ministry and Ministry of Communications offered no answer to this. They both tossed the buck, as they say, to the Board of Revenue, who was pissed that they were evading responsibility. The foreigners then sent direct communications to the Qing government, receiving no reply, and thus the initial loan was simply shelved. In August of 1910, Sheng Shuhuai reported, "Setting up associations in Hunan and Hubei to resist foreign loans, raise funds, and build the railway on their own are only empty promises of no use in solving real problems. Their claimed fundraising figures are unreliable." The matter was investigated at multiple levels. On October 14th, Sheng Shuhuai reported to the regent Zaifeng the Hunan portion of the line required 34 million taels of silver, but the railway company had only collected about 1.7 million silver dollars. The Hubei portion required 67 million, but the railway company only raised just under 1 million silver dollars. If the two railway lines were to be built, they simply had to borrow money from foreigners. Zaifeng appointed Sheng Shuhuai as the Minister of Communications on January 6 of 1911, and Sheng Shuhuai secretly began to negotiate with the representatives of the four foreign nations. By late April, they reached an agreement, and in May, Zaifeng had made an imperial edict announcing the nationalization of the railway lines again. It is also important to note some other external factors here. In June of 1910, the Japanese and Russians signed a second agreement stipulating the boundaries of their spheres of influence over Manchuria. Once that was signed, Japan formally annexed Korea. Then Russia, on January 12th of 1911, requested the Qing government release them the rights to Xinjiang, Mongolia, and parts of Manchuria. On March 25th, the Qing government was forced to agree. And then Britain came and stepped up their aggression in Tibet. By January of 1911, the British Army was occupying Pianma in Yunnan province. It was under these very dire circumstances the Qing court simply kind of buried their heads in the sand, and they focused on the railway projects. Zaifeng was determined to pursue railway nationalization. In order to carry this out, he had to adopt a series of radical actions. On May 9th of 1911, Zaifeng cancelled the earlier approval for the private railway company's rights to the Hubei and Hunan portions of the line. Then on the 18th, he appointed Duanfang as minister in charge of the Guangzhou-Hankow and Sichuan-Hankow lines. Then on May the 23rd and 30th, he ordered the provinces of Sichuan and Hunan to stop collecting taxes to support the public shares on the railway lines. All of this was designed to get the railway companies to come to new terms. The nationalization of the railway lines was met with fierce opposition from the people of Hunan, Sichuan, Guangdong, and Hubei. Zaifeng's immediate problem was dealing with the funds collected by the private companies. He needed to buy them out. Many called to have the government bail the companies out. Others said they should just be held accountable and audited. Zaifeng decided to collect all the shares and issue railway bonds at the same value. Thus, the people who wished to divest could do so technically. The investors were not happy at all, specifically the Sichuanese, who had the largest public shareholding. Basically, all of the investors would only be partially compensated by the government's bond scheme. What they really wanted was a proper buyout, with silver, not bonds. The Sichuan Railway Company by 1911 had raised 14 million taels, 4 of which had been expended and 3 were lost in speculation. Zaifeng was not happy with the Governor-General of Sichuan, and he hastily appointed General Zhao Erfang to replace him by August 4th, to force the issue to a resolvement. Zhao Erfang made his way to Chengde, and he made sure to bring numerous military and police units to maintain order. On August 5th, Zhao Erfang was given orders to force the shareholders in Sichuan to take the bonds. It should be noted, Zhao Erfang had a nickname, the Butcher. On August the 11th, more than 10,000 protesters began rallies against the proposals in Chengde and organized a series of strikes and boycotts. Students, merchants, and workers were showcasing their solidarity. Zaifeng was outraged by the situation, and he ordered Zhao Erfang to, quote, firmly suppress the unrest. This was sweet music to Zhao Erfang's ears, as he began requesting funds for additional troops, to which Zaifeng approved. Yet Zhao Erfang soon found out the situation was much more dire than they all believed. Zhao Erfang began sending requests to Zaifeng to reach some sort of solution to the crisis. But on September the 2nd, Zaifeng issued strict orders to him stating, suppress the disturbance effectively, disperse the protesters quickly, and not let the situation lead to chaos. If the troubles persist and lead to unrest, you will be punished. And thus, Zhao Erfang was pushed into a corner. He had no choice. On September the 7th, he lured out Lou Lun, Pu Dianjin, and other leaders of what was then being called the Railway Protection League, the Provincial Assembly, and the private railway company to the Governor's General Office by falsely telling them, a telegram from Beijing brings good news. We need to exchange views right away. Once the men arrived, they were all arrested. News broke out of the act, and the city of Chengde erupted. Thousands of people flocked to the Governor General's office. Zhao Erfang dispatched troops to cut them off at the street corners, but the angry crowd broke through the barricades and poured into the Governor General's office. At this point, Zhao Erfang ordered the troops to fire upon the people. The angry mob suffered heavy casualties. Despite this, the next day, even more protesters showed up and dozens more were shot. Thus, all of the Sichuan people rose up in arms. On the 7th, Zhao Erfang reported, thousands of people fiercely attacked the Governor General's office. It is not sure whether stability can be restored. We need the court to dispatch thousands of strong troops from the capital to rush to Sichuan to prepare for trouble. Zaifeng had gambled on forcing the railway protesters into submission, and now he had provoked a full-on rebellion. There was no other action than to push forward. On September the 9th, Zaifeng issued a decree praising Zhao Erfang's performance and gave out the order, Select a capable general to quickly lead nearby troops to Sichuan, where Zhao Rufang will assume command. On the 12th, Zaifeng, against the pleas of numerous advisors to peacefully comply with the public opinion, ordered Zhao Rufang to direct the new and old armies to destroy those promoting rebellion, so that the unrest does not spread. The next day, Zaifeng received a telegram stating Chengdu was surrounded. At this point, Zaifeng was sort of grasping at straws. He appointed Chen Sheishuan to deal with the Sichuan situation. Chen Sheishuan was to, quote, to work with Zhao Rufang in calming and suppressing the unrest in Sichuan. But Chen Sheishuan instead advocated for completely reversing the course of action to try and regain the public's confidence through a more gentle approach. Chen Sheishuan telegrammed the court advising the temporary release under the guarantee of the detained gentry, the promise of the Sichuan people will not lose a penny of their capital, and that no innocent people will be killed. The people and the government must move forward together. There should be some words of self-reproach in the edict. If the court could do this, public opinion would be calmed. People everywhere will dance for joy. Prince Qing and his colleagues disagreed with the stance, and the Ministry of Communications told the Qing court they rejected the idea altogether. Zaifeng took the advice and rejected it as well. Chen Sheishuan telegrammed the Qing court again. A wing heat has aggravated my old illness and makes it very hard to go to my post. Please relieve me of my position. By rejecting Chen Sheishuan's proposal, Zaifeng had lost the last chance to resolve the Sichuan railway crisis. Now, going a little bit back in time, because it's important, we talked a lot about the new policies. Within Hubei province, a sort of a elite army had been developed. As part of the new army program, Hubei, like other provinces, modernized its military force. The French, Germans, Americans, and other advisors had come to help with the process. In the end, Hubei's new army became one of the best armies in China, second pretty much only to Yuan Shikai's Beiyang army. Because of this, the Hubei army became sort of a model for neighboring provinces' programs. Now, Yuan Shikai had strict political controls over the Beiyang army. Soldiers who form an association or spread rumors should be executed. Yuan Shikai had privatized his army by promoting officers from within, building internal cliques around himself. And it was pretty insane stuff. He had an altar for his men to pray to him for, where they would kowtow every day. That was a real thing. The Hubei New Army, on the other hand, was more loosely controlled by the Qing court. This left some room for revolutionaries to get in. The distribution of the Hubei Army garrisons helped facilitate the rapid spread of revolutionary influence. A few amount of troops were scattered throughout the countryside, with the vast majority concentrated around Wuchang. The urban social networks thus crept into the military. Now, just before the year 1911, it's estimated 2,000 of the 15,000 troops were members of the Wenzu Esha Literary Society, and perhaps another 2,000 were members of the Gongqinghui, the Four Together Society. The Hubei Army is thought to have had roughly 5,000 revolutionaries, 4,000 who were lukewarm on revolutionary ideas, and another 1,000 firmly loyal to the Qing. With everything going on, by fall of 1911, the revolutionaries in the Hubei Army were preparing an uprising. The revolutionary groups I just mentioned began talks with the Tongmenghui in September of 1911. They were attempting to collaborate to perform a major uprising, set for October the 6th, during the Mid-Autumn Festival in the Wuhan area. They were forced to postpone it just a bit, though. On October the 9th, one of the revolutionary leaders, Sun Wu, was supervising the making of explosives in the Russian concession in Hankow, where one of the devices accidentally exploded. Sun Wu was hospitalized, and the hospital staff soon discovered his identity and reported him to the Qing authorities. Fearing the jig was up, the revolutionaries within the Hubei Army in Wuchang, led by Zhang Jiwu, the leader of the Literary Society, decided to launch the uprising immediately. However, disaster struck twice, as the plot was leaked to the viceroy of Wuchang, who immediately ordered a crackdown. General Rui Cheng, the viceroy of Wuchang and the divisional commander of the Hubei Army, Jiang Biao, fled for their lives. The previously elected revolutionary commander-in-chief, Liu Gong, was in Hankow at the time. The vice commander, Liao Ying, was stuck in Jingshan. Jiang Yiwu had also fled and Sun Wu was gravely wounded. Within the catastrophe, provincial commander Wu Jiaolin stepped up to take charge. On the night of October the 10th, Wu Jiaolin led the revolutionary elements of the Hubei Army and staged a mutiny at the Wuchang garrison. In the process, they captured the viceroy's residence, but the viceroy managed to escape. The city was thrown into complete disorder, and many Manchu were killed. From the night of the 10th to noon of the 11th, the casualties of the Revolutionary Army were about 20, while more than 500 Manchu soldiers were killed and over 300 were captured. The next day, one of the high-ranking officers within the Hubei Army, Li Yuanhong, was persuaded to become the temporary leader of the movement. Wu Jiaolin stated, "After the uprising, both military and civil administration will be needed. I propose that we elect Li Yuanhong as military governor of Hubei and Tang Hualong as head of the civil administration. These two are highly respected in Hubei, so if they agree to be in charge, other provinces are likely to respond and support us." Now, Liu Yuanhong was initially very hesitant. He was screaming at Wu Jiaolin after his statement, "Why do you want revolution? You put your own family in danger. You are a scholar, not a revolutionary. Do not join this revolution." Yet they twisted his arm and he came around. On October the 11th, the mutineers formed a military government representing Hubei. Li Yuanhong led the charge in cutting off his own coup, and he was appointed military governor. At this time, Hubei had also just suffered some major floods. Thus, Li Yuanhong had begun his tenure by ordering, "Let government employees and civilians go back to work, and give tax breaks for a year to alleviate their financial difficulties." The government's military organization was quite chaotic from the offset. It was said, "The revolution had just broken forth, and many different ideas were put forth. Departments were established and abolished one after another, and responsibilities kept changing." It was quickly decided the military would deal with military affairs, leaving civil affairs to civil administrators. The new chief of the civil government, Tang Hualong, ordered the existing treaties to be respected, hoping foreigners would recognize their new military government. On the 15th, the U.S. consul met with Li Yuanhong and Tang Hualong, asking about their treaties and their debts to the Qing government. Tang Hualong responded, "The military government will only recognize debts of the Qing government if they were incurred before October the 10th. The relief funds for the Hubei floods should be raised locally from wealthy gentry. As for the government structure, there will be no more imperial system, and a republican government will be established after the revolution." To be honest, the United States kind of liked those words. So, this prompted the U.S. to declare neutrality to the issue. Seeing this, Britain followed, and then France, Russia, and Japan. Prior to the revolution, Tang Hualong had encouraged individual security forces in Hankow to join a federation of Hankow associations, with Ma Zhongji as their president. After the revolution, he began arming them to help the revolutionary forces to maintain order. They would become instrumental against the Qing forces. 2 days after the Wuchang Uprising, the Qing court ordered Admiral Sa Jianbing to take his fleet to Hubei. However, Sa Jianbing also happened to be Li Yuanhong's teacher at the Tianjin Naval Academy. Tang Hualong thus proposed Li write him a letter urging for a naval mutiny. Meanwhile, Tang Hualong wrote to his brother, Tang Xiangming, who just happened to be an aide to Sa Jianbing, "The Wuchang Uprising is justified, and it is supported all over the country. Revolution is inevitable. We hope you encourage the Navy to abandon the Qing and thus earn special merit." Many of the naval officers were sympathetic to the revolution, and they soon gave up the confrontation. Xia Jianbing, in response to a potential mutiny, simply left the fleet and retired in Shanghai. The entire fleet left the Wuhan battleground and headed for Wuchang. At Wuchang, the Navy would mutiny on October the 23rd. Tang Xiangming was elected the interim naval commander. Another revolutionary leader, Huang Xing, who had helped Dr. Sun Yat-sen found the Tongmenghui, came to Wuchang to meet with Li Yuanhong. On October the 28th, Huang Xing and Song Jiaoren came to Wuchang, and Huang Xing asked to become the wartime commander-in-chief, while Song Jiaoren asked to assist the military government of Hubei with foreign affairs. By early November, Li Yuanhong had told the men, since their province had been the first successful at uprising, they needed to set an example for the nation. They needed to form a constitutional document to form a new Republic of China. They would model it on the Constitution of the United States, advocating for a federal system based on the principles of local self-governance, guaranteed civil rights, and the establishment of a separation of powers. It was the first time in Chinese history that a principle of separation of powers would be adopted in fundamental law. The revolutionaries were all busy planning. However, the Qing were not going to sit back, idle. The wrath of the Qing was about to be unleashed. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And hey, if after all that you are still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel over at YouTube. Over there, I've just released episode 2 in my series on the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, the Jiangqiao campaign. Also, please check out my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel, where you can find more exclusive podcasts. There are now more than 13 podcasts over there, and when you join the Patreon, you can vote on what will be the next subject. Check it out, it'll mean a lot to me. What began as a railway protection movement had spiraled out of control when Zaifeng unleashed the butcher known as General Zhao Rifeng upon Sichuan. In his attempts to quell the protesters, Zhao Rifeng had ushered in a full-blown revolution. The Wuchang Revolution would spring forth multiple revolutions, and soon the Qing Dynasty would come to its bitter end.